And what was really interesting about that, it's an irregular entrance wound. And so when the medical examiner looked at that photograph, like almost immediately she said, well, that's really interesting. That's an irregular entrance wound, which means that the projectile had to have hit something, and then it starts to tumble prior to entering. And then when it enters, it doesn't make a nice round circular entrance wound. It has kind of this odd-shaped entrance wound. And of course, we were like, of course, because if it's shot through the bedroom window, then the bullet has to go through the glass and the metal screen, and maybe it hit the window frame where they thought that there was a strike. And if that's the case, it starts to tumble, and it hits Jeanette Williams in the arm, and it leaves that very distinctive entrance wound, right? And then there's another entrance wound right below that one, and it then is that circular entrance wound. So now there's no glass and no metal frame, and there's no intervening object, and you start getting the circular entrance wounds. And so we were like, aha, because then we were trying to figure out if, in fact, the men had fired from the foot of the bed, what intervening object would there have been between, the foot of the bed and Jeanette Williams? And there's nothing.
There's nothing.
Right, the victim. There's nothing. There's no intervening object that the bullet would have hit to tumble. And so it really then started to solidify in our minds that for whatever reason, her story just wasn't accurate.
But
and another really...
Okay,
sorry,
go ahead. No, you finish your sentence.
Well, I was going to say another really big piece for us was the glass on the bed that had been noted by the detectives.
That's right.
What women are going to sleep with glass on their bed?
Not really.
That just didn't make any sense to us.
No.
And so because there was an argument maybe that hole had been had occurred on another occasion, like that wasn't a new event, and that the hole had been there and they just hadn't gotten it fixed for whatever reason. But we were like, but there's glass on the bed, right?
Sure.
And the window, the bed was below the window, and so it made sense that if the projectiles had come through, broken the glass had fallen out, the object below the window was in fact the bed. So, then we started thinking, oh my gosh, this is really interesting. We've really got something here. So then we started trying to find the people from the party, the witnesses from 40 years ago. And as you can imagine,
that hadn't been called, right?
Right. They hadn't been called, although in Florida, luckily, you take depositions in cases. And so some of these witnesses had been deposed in 1976, and so I was able to read what they would have testified to, even though they weren't called at trial. And we spent probably 6 months trying to track down the people from the party. And, some of them had very ordinary names, if I can say such a thing, like Bob Smith. And so we were trying to track down, Bob Smith, who might have been such and such an age in 1976. And oh my gosh, it just was like a Herculean effort to track down these witnesses. And so many of them couldn't remember the specific details, like what they were wearing or what they were eating, but they all remembered, Clifford Williams and Nathan Myers being at the party. We discussed with them their depositions, and they said if I said it in 1976, then
it's true.
That's right. That was accurate. That's what happened. And there had been some thought, that maybe these alibi witnesses were coming forward on behalf of Clifford Williams and Nathan Myers. And so I thought, well, maybe they would tell me, no, we were paid to be an alibi witness. Right? There's some amount of skepticism when we talk about alibi witnesses. And, maybe they would tell me that they had been paid to be an alibi witness, or they had been coerced or threatened to be an alibi witness. And if that's what they told me, I probably would have at that point in time stopped my investigation. But in fact, none of them told me that. They all said, we were at this party. We were friends with these two women that lived down the street from us. These were our neighbors, and we were friendly with them. And, we don't know what happened, but these two men were in the birthday party with us. And so I was able to find several witnesses from 1976 that could remember that. And so then we had the physical evidence that was leaning towards the theory that, in fact, the shooting occurred at the window and not inside, as described by Nina Marshall. We now are getting corroboration from the alibi witnesses that, in fact, they did remember Nathan and Clifford being at the party. So then we started to investigate the fact that a man had confessed to it 20 years later, this gentleman by the name of Nathaniel Lawson. And so Nathan Myers had a childhood friend who still lives in Jacksonville. And over the years, he had sort of heard, by way of rumor or whatnot, that Nathaniel Lawson was the one who had committed the crime. And other people had approached him over the years. Nathaniel Lawson said something to me that made me think he was the shooter. And so this gentleman then became a resource for me and got me in touch with some of the other people from the neighborhood who had contact with this gentleman, because now this gentleman had passed in 1994, and there was no way for me to now interview him.
Really.
So I'm left to interview, friends and family and anybody else that I can locate. Did he ever mention anything like this to you? So I had the one statement from the gentleman in prison that had spoken to Nathan Myers, and then I'm out interviewing other people. And I was able to locate 3 other people who were friendly with Nathaniel Lawson, who's told me, yes, he had told them that he was, in fact, the perpetrator. And, they were friends of his. And one person told me, I would have never come forward and told anybody that he was the perpetrator, except for the fact that you're now asking, and he's deceased. So I don't feel like I can't disclose it. And one of them was Clifford Williams' brother. He, too, living in that neighborhood, had heard rumors and had confronted him at one point in time. And Nathaniel Lawson had acknowledged to Clifford's brother that he, in fact, was the perpetrator. And then there was another person that he had disclosed to. So in total, I was able to find 4 people that he had disclosed to.
Wow.
And so I'm still like, what do you do with that information? I mean, I can't really confirm it. I can't question him about it. I certainly wouldn't hang my hat on it. But Harriet, the really interesting thing is I'm then rereading the trial transcripts and all of the depositions. And I get to the deposition of, somebody who had been out there that night and had been deposed in 1976. And the prosecutor at the time, I think, asked just kind of an offhand question, like, who did you leave the party with, or who did you leave the area with when you left that night? And this person discloses, I left with my friend Cookie. I left with a guy named Rico Rivers, and I also left with Nathaniel Lawson. And I was like, oh, my gosh.
Wow.
So the first time I read it, it wasn't significant to me because I didn't have any context for it. But then when I went back and I reread all of this information and I see Nathaniel Lawson's name being mentioned by somebody in 1976, so now I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I can actually tie him to the scene that night. Wow. And the prosecutor didn't have any context, so he didn't know to ask a follow-up question, where did Nathaniel Lawson come from and why was he there? And, there was no follow-up question. But I was at least able to tie him to, the scene, independent of the people that I had spoken to that he had confessed to. So I ended up giving that, some amount of significance. Again, I don't know that you could exonerate somebody based on that
Just
alone,
on that.
but
Mm-hmm.
right. But we've got all this other information.
So what would you say was the heaviest piece of information that flipped this case over after all those years? What convinced you of the fact that they had been wrongly convicted?
I think it was the forensics and the physical evidence.
Okay.
Right. I don't know, that I could have relied just on the alibis. I certainly wouldn't have relied just on the gentleman confessing,
right.
20 years later, but the forensics was really powerful. So in addition to, yeah, all that we talked about, I ended up doing an experiment, and we went out to the house. And we still have some time, Harriet?
We have out. Very little time, so go ahead.
I mean, this is just such a fascinating case.
It is. It is.
We actually went to a salvage yard and bought a metal screen, because now they're made out of, fabric and mesh or whatever. But we bought a metal screen, and we shot a .38 caliber revolver through the metal screen to see, one, can you get 6 shots through a hole? And then, what does the damage look like when you do that? And it was really crazy because the damage that we got on our screen very much mimicked the damage on the screen from 1976.
Fascinating.
And then we also did a sound experiment. We shot a .38 inside the bedroom to see if the partygoers could have heard that, if in fact, as Nina discussed, it had occurred inside the bedroom and we couldn't hear it from down the street at the party. Oh. And then we shot a .38 caliber revolver outside the bedroom, and we could hear it clear as day down the street where the party was located. So we did these other things just to try to, dot the I's and cross the T's.
Yeah, that's really incredible that after all of that, you wonder what the original prosecutors were doing, that they didn't dig as deep as you did. Who knows what happened so many years ago, but certainly the results of what you did sprung Nathan Myers and his uncle Clifford Williams out of prison after all those years. So you certainly did phenomenal work. And as I've said so often, the gift of freedom is priceless. And that's very much what you gave to them. So
well, thank you.
This was wonderful.
Well, thanks. And if your listeners actually have some interest, I did a 70-page report kind of setting forth everything that we did in this case so that people would understand how we came to our conclusion. There was a concern for me that people would think, we were just letting people out of prison. But in fact, I mean, this was a really well investigated case, and I'm very confident in the conclusion. And so if they want to go onto our website, they can actually look at the report that we produced in this case.
And what is the website, Shelley?
The website is www.sao4th.com. And there's a link to conviction integrity. So SAO, so State Attorney's Office.
Oh, okay.
And we're considered the 4th Judicial Circuit, so 4th.com.
Okay. .com. Wonderful. Okay, terrific. Well, I so appreciate your time today and the fact that you took us through this case from the very beginning to the end, and certainly the results were positive, and that's what really matters, that these two men can begin their lives all over again. So thank you once again for your expertise and your time, and we enjoyed speaking with you today. Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you, Harriet. Anytime. Take care.
All right. You too. And I hope you'll join us next time on Pursuing Justice.